morning, and thank you very much for joining Ahead with Pure Communications Group today. I'm Charlotte Gentry, CEO and founder of Pure Communications Group, and I'm delighted to be broadcasting live from RSA House in the West End. The main purpose of today is really to showcase how to deliver a hybrid event successfully, but also to offer lots of solutions to many of the challenges that you may have been facing over the past few months and also may encounter in the months ahead. So we're aiming to answer many of those, and I've got 4 fabulous panellists with me and speakers today who will introduce themselves to you shortly. We also have a hashtag today, which is Ahead with Pure Comms Group, so please do post as much content to social media as you can. That would be great. And I think it's important also to show the venue that we're sitting in today, because it's really a very beautiful room, and our primary purpose has been to deliver a broadcast studio in an event space so that lots of you can see how that actually works and what it really looks like. So we'll be taking lots of shots today of the venue and also of the audience who have very kindly today come in person to be with us. So thank you all very, very much for joining us in person. It's lovely to have you all here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the 4 speakers. So we have Laura from Stress Matters. We have Sam Allen, who is a professional broadcaster and presenter. We have Adrian Dixon from Starstruck, and we have Laura Pierce as well from RSA House. So I'll start with Laura. Perhaps you can give an intro in terms of what your experience is.
Thank you. So hi everybody, I am Laura Capella-Abra. I'm the founder of Stress Matters, and I am from the events industry, so I've been organising events for about 17, 18 years. I set up Stress Matters. I wanted to work out how we could consider workplace wellbeing and mental safety a little bit more at our events. So now we've hit pandemic time, thinking about how we can run our events, whether or not live, virtual or hybrid, in a more mentally safe way. So trying to advise businesses on what we can do to look after delegates and our crew.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. And Sam?
Hi, my name is Sam Allen, and if you know me ordinarily, I'm sitting there. So at the moment, I'm feeling extremely uncomfortable. I'm a professional host virtually, now in the hybrid world as well, and of course, back in the days, BC, I was a professional MC, traveling the world with corporate organizations and associations. I'm a meeting designer, and now, thanks to the opportunities that this wonderful pandemic has provided, I run a meeting design and virtual and hybrid event hosting organization. And I'm super excited to see feet, just so you know. Lovely to see your feet, ladies and gentlemen.
And I'm certainly not competing for your job, Sam, that's for sure. Adrian.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you for having me on here as well. I'm Adrian Dixon, I'm founder of Starstruck. We created Starstruck as a broadcast indie back in the day, so we made TV programs only. And then we over time, found a niche, I guess, bringing broadcast skill sets to brand. So therefore, we did lots of brand creative, live streams, and latterly, of course, events. So that's all changed in the last 12 months, but essentially, brand, broadcast, and events is what we do.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And Laura?
Thank you, Charlotte. Thanks for having me today. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Pierce, and I work as Head of Sales and Marketing here at RSA House. I work for CH&Co, which is a contract caterer that caters across many locations in London. I've been in the hospitality industry for over 15 years, and in the hotel agency and venue side for over 10 years now. So a wealth of experience and knowledge in venue sales and event planning.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. So I think getting right into it really, I think the first question that really we need to ask is, what is hybrid? What does it mean? Because it means so many different things to many people. And it feels certainly now that live events has really moved very much into the TV broadcasting arena. And really that hybrid obviously has been around for a very long time in the TV area. So what does that mean to lots of you? And Adrian, perhaps let's start with you.
Sure. I think, firstly, it's great to be back on stage, actually, at an event and hearing like, the mics and everything like that. It's really weird. It's been 18 months of that, of not doing that. I think there's the big difference with hybrid pre and post-COVID or during COVID is that before it was a nice to have, Now I feel, certainly at the moment anyway, it's a necessity. I think while we've still got international travel restrictions, we won't have international delegates at events, so therefore it is crucial to have, you know, the additional live streams. I think with a hybrid event, you've got the event happening in the room, you've got something happening online somewhere, and you're bringing an audience together. But crucially, it's two different audiences, and you need to cater for both. So I think while we'd all love to go to the, I don't know, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas at the drop of a hat, we might not want to go to a rainy conference in the middle of Britain in January. So I think while people will fancy certain events in person, I think there will still be a big demand for virtual events, and to do those both ways, it's really important to think where your audience is and how they're consuming this and how we're going to deliver the content for each audience. So I think that's really one consideration. The second thing is the right venue as well, because venues have had to change and they now need to think about these kind of hybrid events and how they need to cater those.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. I mean, Sam, from your perspective, you've obviously done a lot of, in the past, a lot of travelling, but I know you've been incredibly busy with presenting at a lot of virtual and hybrid experiences. How have those experiences differed for you?
Well, I think, first of all, Adrian, that is probably the best description of a hybrid, because I think we're all getting tied up with the word hybrid. And I think also to talk to our stakeholders about the word hybrid is also a nightmare. If you say to my mum, what's a hybrid? She'd know what it is. She'd say it's a car. And we're trying to sort of communicate yet again in the event industry and create more difficulty for what is already a really difficult job that we all do, right? So I think that how you say, I think we need to take away the word live, because I haven't, to my knowledge, hosted anything where there were dead people over the last 14, 15 months. I have been hosting live events. I just haven't been in a space where there's been a beautiful audience. The audience are beautiful, but they've actually not been in the same room as me. So I think that whole thing around what we talk about, I think the quicker we lose the word hybrid and we're just talking about event and where our stakeholders are, I think we'll be in a much stronger position to be communicating. And I think also the word hybrid at the moment, and raise your hands if you disagree with me. I think when you hear the word hybrid, you hear the word really expensive, and I know that was 2 words. And for those of you at home, I'm sure you're nodding, but everybody in the audience has not raised a hand. So I think, again, we've got to sort of look at the language of this. And I certainly think one of my biggest fears at the very beginning, because, yes, I was traveling all around the world, which was lovely and clearly not very sustainable and was not doing a lot for my impact on the planet positively. And I lost my entire business back in March because I go to face-to-face events. I was blocked out for the entire year that went. So very quickly I needed to figure out what to do, and I had absolutely no belief, in people who do know me in the audience know I'm passionate about engagement and participation in in-person events. I've been driving this and harping on about this for flipping years. And that was my massive concern, and I know it's concerns for lots of people around engagement, which we'll talk about. But over the course of doing an incredible online event design course, yes, they exist, certification in online events, I learned through that engagement is all about content, and whatever you're driving, if it's of interest to your stakeholders, people will stay online. This course was 3 hours. I thought, I have got the attention span of a gnat. But 3 hours of engaging content that I was loving, and it was like, I want more. I said, you cannot network. I'm not going to get any business from this. Turns out you can still have naughty corners in the virtual world, and we'll talk probably more about that. And again, from that naughty corner came some really great friends. We have an alumni now once a month to chew the fat over this world. So I think it's all about, my one word, which I'll keep on harping on about, is all about design, and then the second word is stakeholders. So,
I mean, what you're talking about is absolutely spot on, Sam, and you know, the content piece is probably the most critical piece currently in terms of the design of the virtual, the hybrid experience. And you know, I wonder, Adrian, you know, because you've developed your skill set in TV, how you've then taken that skill set and adapted that, and that's a very pertinent word currently in our market, and how you've adapted that to deliver hybrid and virtual events.
Well, I think everyone's lifestyle has changed now. People are much more used to sitting at home and consuming things through their devices, sitting on their webcam. So you've got to kind of give them something different, or give them something that they're not expecting. It's still the same as if you were doing an event, you know, purely in a venue. You'd still have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You'd have to bring some gloss. You know, we've got a stage, we've got lovely little units we're sitting behind. You know, we've put the effort in. Well, I haven't. You guys have put the effort in to this, and I think that needs to continue. You know, it's no good. We're all so tired of doing the Zoom call now, and like, I'd just like to go to the next slide now. You know, I think there has to be that entertainment value that is brought in, and I think our experience in TV has certainly been crucial in that, because, you know, you have a beginning, middle, and end. You have a storyboard, you have a script, you have a running order. Something's not making, that's a bit exciting. Let's move things around a bit. And I think you do have to fight for the attention with the audience more than ever. They've got their phones, they might be a little bit more respectful in the room, but at home they're certainly like, yeah, all right, I've got to go and pick up the kids. You know, they're fighting with the dog, the spouse, what we're having for dinner tonight, all of that, you know. And I think you've got to up the quality of the content. And I think it's really important to create, I always say this, to create a show. It's got to be showbiz. It's got to have a, you know, the beginning, middle, and end, bit of gloss, and think about the one unique thing you're bringing to every event. Otherwise, I'll just pick it up in a, you know, press release later on.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely key, isn't it? And, you know, I just think one of the biggest questions that we're always asked, and, you know, is how, and I know that there are questions that have been submitted actually from the broadcast audience today and from our audience in person today, is how do you make sure that you bring in the online audience to feel very much equally as part of the event as those people sitting in person? So I don't know, Adrian, whether you have got some tips around that perhaps you could share.
Well, as I said, everyone's behaviour has changed, and if you're at a one-day conference, you're there for the day. So that organiser has you for the whole day, and therefore you can do an hour-and-a-half lunch. That's great. The people at home are not going to hang around for an hour and a half, no matter how good your afternoon session is, to tune in, you know, to your schedule. So I think you've got to think about both audiences and what you can do for both kind of groups. Can you make things more available on demand? Can you make things, you know, maybe we all get together for a live in the morning, but then people can go out to different breakout rooms, and those breakout rooms are real breakout rooms where you have an online audience joining you, just like the main arena. And I think for me, number one is the timetable. For the second thing is probably using broadcast tools or broadcast experience to say, well, if, you know, we wouldn't have a show going on for 8 hours on television, so how can we sort of, you know, shift things up and make them a bit more interesting? So what do we give the online audience that's a little bit different to those delegates that are in the room? Because they may have paid a different price to the online audience compared to the people who are in the room. So it's definitely maybe 1.5 shows you're creating, or 1.5 days you're creating, rather than just the original day that you would have had before.
Yeah, of course, and I'm sure that when it comes to the content delivery, that if you produce content that's in much smaller chunks, I mean, it's rare that you watch a TV show and you've got a chunk of content that's for 20, 25 minutes even. They tend to sort of chop and change those pieces of content to keep the online audience as engaged as they possibly can do. So I guess this doesn't really have to be any different, and perhaps we should follow those rules. Of course, please. Let's be controversial. Let's be controversial.
I can just interrupt. Woohoo! This is exciting. I think we've been in the world, and I think your language, Adrian, there just sums it up. We're all tired of Zoom calls. A Zoom call is not an event, and I think we've really got to differentiate between that. I'm the same because we come from the same world. It's a show, and any client, and I know I've got a lovely client in the audience. We talk about this as a show, and I think we change that language. When you start talking about show, you start putting on, you know, and you start thinking about those things. I think that linking presenter, but I think with content, and I don't mean a presenter, a professor talking for 45 minutes. When we talk about content, content is whatever is right for your stakeholders. We can sit, and I think a lot of us have been doing that. Mine is Madam Secretary, others is, you know, Line of Duty, whatever it might be, or Cobra Kai, let's be honest. You know, we will sit and we will consume content if we enjoy it. But then the other thing we have is that flexibility. And I think and it'd be interesting to hear, Laura, from you from a venue point of view, we were constrained in the times before BC because we had to get in at a certain time because we booked it, and we had to get out at a certain time. We've got slightly different constraints now because if we're working with a virtual audience, We don't have to broadcast or film or be in a conference from 9 until 6. We can record, we can use that wonderful legacy, and that will also generate revenue. And it's how do we now dovetail in with what happens in the in-person. But again, back to that engagement is not trying to create. I think a lot of people, in a lot of sessions I've heard, how do you recreate the same experience? Well, the simple answer is you can't. And no one should expect it. I don't go to Twickenham. I used to go to Twickenham to work in the good old days with Lauren in the audience. I don't go to Twickenham to, watch 80 minutes of rugby. I go to Twickenham for the atmosphere, the Guinness, trying to start a Mexican wave with 70,000 people, and then I watch back the rugby as a fan. When I watch the rugby at home, it's a different reason I'm watching it at home, because it's an important match or whatever it might be, I haven't got a ticket. So I think we have to not be frightened of these changes, but we've got to work with venues and see this new way of working.
Absolutely. I mean, I wonder, Sam, you've obviously had to adapt your skill set quite considerably from doing a lot of live presenting to then doing a lot of stuff virtually into camera. How have you had to adapt the way in which you present? Because there's a whole piece here around presenter skills, isn't there? And actually sort of prepping your stakeholders in order to present.
I think Adrian and I might co-write a book about this, and I'm sure that everyone's also had these experiences. One, I've spent way more money on makeup, because seriously, you've got to whack that stuff on to look not like a dead person on screen. It's very much about, when you're with an audience, even with a mask on, I can see eyes, I can see people nodding, and as a host especially, because my job is to keep and maintain that energy the whole time for our audiences. So you need to understand how a camera works, and that's not easy, and especially it's much easier looking at a camera when you're in a studio environment when there are people and there's a lovely man or lady, could be a camera lady, it's not today, behind the camera giving us a little wink and a nod, he's looking there. But when you're on your own in an environment, and I have a studio that I present from, I'm doing this day in, day out as a host, and I have short, snappy link presentations. Planning, please plan. You need to be scripting, exactly the same as Adrian has just mentioned. And speakers, as much as we wouldn't dare in the good old days, I keep on going back to professors, but it's a good way, or big stakeholders in corporates. You wouldn't tell the CEO of Barclays that he needed speaker or she needed speaker training, God forbid. But actually in this world, we have to allocate a decent amount of time. Otherwise, we're not giving the experience to our audiences both ways. You need to be looking at a camera in a hybrid, you need to be making sure you've got your audience, you need to be able to see these people. And my one big question to everybody is, when did sitting down presenting be a good thing other than in a panel? How did that happen?
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. It's not natural, really. We're used to walking around stages and being much more charismatic and enigmatic in the way that we present. And I don't know, Laura, from your perspective, whether you've found that you've, from a mental health perspective, whether you've been talking to a lot of key individuals around their presenting anxieties, but also their anxieties in general, because they've had to now, travelling to locations to do that presenting, and what that sort of felt like.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting, I was speaking to a client the other day who is pretty senior in his organisation. He does regular leadership team meetings, and the idea for him of going back into a meeting and presenting face-to-face is actually really worrying him and causing anxiety. He's become comfortable presenting in an online format, but that change back is something that's driving some anxiety for him. And I think that's different for each person. So some of us feel very comfortable now online, so very much like Sam. I stand up, I put my heels on when I'm presenting, I can't sit down presenting, and that's how I've become accustomed to it. That's how I keep their energy up. But for some people, that's really uncomfortable, and they want to sit and hide behind the screen, so it is a very quiet presentation. And I think that's where we've got to support those presenters, we've got to support individuals with what's right for them. And a lot of that is skills training, in terms of presentation skills training, of course, but it also is being conscious of their confidence levels. And of course, our confidence levels impacts our mental health as well. So the level of anxiety some people might feel about the first time speaking actually how are they feeling about it? How are we as organisers supporting them if it's the first time they've ever been on a stage? And even the first time behind a screen presenting. We think it's easier because you're just sat in front of your laptop, but it isn't to do a good job, as we've been saying. So talking to your speakers, speaking to those people that are, whether or not it's an MC or an internal team moderating, making sure they have the comfort level that they're not feeling anxious, because actually you want the best out of people. And that content is only going to be engaging if those people are engaged. You've got to have your speakers engaged in the content that they're delivering and feeling confident, and if they don't feel confident, that's when we're going to hit challenges on that engagement of the whole audience, and we've got to therefore manage that anxiety.
Of course, I mean, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the primary challenges that we now face is actually the overall individual anxieties that everybody is experiencing as a result of the last 15 months, and how we handle that, and we'll come on to that shortly. But I just wonder, Laura, from your perspective, in terms of the different broadcasting setups that you've had to manage, and some of the experiences over the last 15 months, what that's looked like from a venue perspective, and also indeed from a catering perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of from the venue side, there's many bonuses because we've got such beautiful spaces here and lots of different versatile spaces that we've been able to offer different backdrops and backgrounds to clients. We've seen different setups. We had a hybrid event here last week actually that is very used to seeing a long top table in a venue, and that's another thing we had to sort of really work with them for their board to understand that it wasn't going to happen like it usually would do, and that was really difficult for them to get. They just didn't understand. And with the distancing and all the measures, the COVID safety measures, etc. as well. So it's sort of, just working with each client, their brief, understanding what they're really trying to do, what they're trying to deliver, and then with us suggesting, oh, this space is going to work great for that, and this is the right background for you. And we've been working with Radiance as well, who've been fantastic in that, and the different sort of hybrid solutions. In terms of sort of a catering point of view, I mean, we've really had to adapt, obviously, over the last sort of 14, 15 months. So we've now, like we were serving today, bento box brunches, which have been fantastic. And we've sort of, in terms of perspex screens and service and gloves and everything's had to be sort of table service. So we've really had to, change the way we've done things and kept up with all of the restrictions and guidance along the way. But it's all been received really well. I think hopefully everyone enjoyed their bento boxes today. And we'll continue to do that and adapt as a catering company in terms of whatever we need to do moving forwards.
Fantastic. I think one of the other challenges that we've certainly, I think a lot of companies have faced is the networking piece. And I know we've got a question actually from the audience. Adam, I don't know whether or not you want to give us a question, which is definitely around the networking piece, isn't it?
Thank you. So is it possible for the networking to kind of be the same in person and kind of joining that up with a virtual audience? And how do you expect that to kind of work in actual practice?
Perhaps I can address that question to Adrian. Do you have some solutions around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got this question from a lot of the CEOs that we work with because they're very used to doing the formal bit on stage and then going and meeting everyone, and that's the bit they enjoy the most. And they were worried about not only the fact that they've got to learn whole new skills, talking to webcam now, they're at home, they don't kind of have those same nerves. They've also got extra stress as well with, will my connection be okay? Will I, So some of the CEOs we've worked with, like Ben at Shell and Sean at British Airways, for example, have said to us, how do we then transfer that networking experience post-speech into something exciting? And I think you've got to do the same thing that you would do in person. So if you've got an event that happens in a room, you would then have a networking session afterwards. But then one of the things that another guy at Shell, Martin Wetzler, is very good at is doing virtual breakout sessions where he has a networking session with the audience that want to speak to him on a more casual one-to-one basis. So he will, perhaps in a virtual sort of setting, would do the main event, then do the physical meet and greet, and then do a virtual hangout afterwards where people will get that more casual interaction with him. So I think from the top level of companies, I think that's what's very important. From a business development point of view, I think there are ways to do it. You're not just going to bump into people. That's what you are going to lose in this time. But I think, you know, technology has moved on. We've got to think about the platforms. Does your conference software offer breakout rooms? Can you do something that's a bit, you know, less formal on Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and actually build that into your schedule? So it's the same thing I was saying before. Create something for the people in the room and create something for people virtually, so there's something for both of them.
Sam, have you got any
I love the word networking, because I think if I've been asked this, you know, if I had £10 for every time someone had said, we can't network because of the pandemic and we're online, I wouldn't be here. Sorry, Charlotte. I would be, because I can't go anywhere else, can I, really? So I think back to, you've got to define what networking is for your stakeholder group. Now, I think a lot of people get networking and socialising muddled up, and I think socialising is very challenging in a hybrid and a virtual environment to try and blend. And we'll get better at it, because we're all becoming much more comfortable with seeing somebody on a screen. You know, I may be here and I may be interviewing somebody on a screen, or in fact, I may be on the screen and interviewing someone on stage. So I think we'll get more comfortable with it, but we have to define networking. In terms of business networking, I have never done so much networking in the last 15 months than my whole life. And for those who know me, I'm a salesperson, because I think we were a lot more comfortable without bumping into people. I was clearly unlucky, or at the bar or somewhere in the good old, I had the distractions. But you know, we were still figuring out ways before COVID. I think we have to sit there and review what we were doing and how we were measuring success. Now, it could be that success is that we give all our socks away at a stand, and that's you know, because we've given away 400 pairs of socks at a stand, that's a measurement of success for some reason. But what does networking mean for your company? Because if it's socialising, there are different ways of doing it, as you said, but I think you can say you bring those elements in where you can, but try and define that networking with data now. So if it's about generating, so our stakeholders, our sponsors, I mean, we've heard it lots and lots of times, our sponsors don't want to sponsor an online event, our exhibitors don't want to exhibit online. Well, actually, technology and the use of the smarter technology means that you can get real-time data. So the SOC people, for example, I won't say which organisation it is, it was an exhibitor, we actually, you know, could give them real-time data about the appointments that they had and how they could qualify that business. And as soon as they had that data, they felt a lot more comfortable with it, but it's a new world. So, Adam, I would say, what does networking mean? Using technology, the platform, I ran a hybrid a couple of weeks ago, so my audience was in Philadelphia and virtually, and I was in my studio here in the UK, and we had everybody on the platform, so we didn't separate our audience, and actually the networking that was happening on the platform was phenomenal. And a big learning for us there was that we needed to make sure that whoever was in the venue in terms of speaking needed to be connected, because actually you're sitting here in silence, nodding and listening to us, you're not networking. So this is not a networking opportunity for you. But if you're on a platform with our online attendees and you're having a little conversation, that's where the networking and the relationships, and to me, again, it's not something I'd love to say to you, I knew that was going to happen and it was going to be really successful. I did not know. It was phenomenal, and the learning was that we needed to make sure that people in-house were connected with our virtual audience, and great stuff was happening, because I'd be talking now and Lauren might be saying, well, Sam's talking a load of rubbish, and then somebody at home says, I totally agree with you, and then they start building up a relationship based on that. So it's just being a little bit, we're spending a bit more time, I think, on understanding what you want from that networking. Can that technology do it? Or is it socialising that we have to do slightly differently?
Can I just add to that as well? So there are a couple of people in the audience today that essentially I've met for the first time today, that I have, in essence, networked with over the pandemic, and I'm meeting them for the first time today. So I completely agree. You can do networking online as well. But as much as I do a lot of public speaking and I run workshops, I consider myself an introvert. So to the point around networking, it actually is better for me to do it online, and it's actually more comfortable for me to do that online, see who I know, who knows who, how I can connect with them, message them first necessarily, then set up a call with them, rather than necessarily going over to a big group of people at a networking event. Now, I do that, and people that know me know I do that, you know, and I've got used to it over the years, and I do enjoy it for sure. But I also like being able to do it online as well. So I think being able to have those options is a really important part. But what we were saying at the beginning, you know, this is an important thing to stay, having both options for different types of people, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, that, you know, all makes perfect sense as well. And I think that, with the networking side of things, again, it boils down to what people feel comfortable with, and that's a very personalised and very individual thing. And some people have actually probably really flourished in this environment because it's felt much more, they felt much more comfortable there. So I think, that leads us probably quite well into the COVID safety arena, because I know that there's a lot of concern actually around, excuse me, around what actually we're allowed to do in terms of the live piece. I think that the government guidelines have changed and adapted quite a lot. We've actually had some questions that were submitted from Virginie, from Arbuthnot Latham, all around actually how do we, can we please have a reminder of what we are required to do until the 19th of July now, and what happens after the 19th of July. And I'd like to caveat these with the fact that the guidelines are changing constantly, and these stipulations are based on England, not the UK. But before the 19th of July, just to clarify, we're at 50% venue capacity with a maximum limit of 1,000 people indoors, which actually is a very significant number of people. So therefore, you could deliver an event for up to 1,000 people currently, but you would need a venue that could accommodate 2,000. So that's quite a significant number of people. I think there's been quite a lot of confusion around that to start with. Outdoors is up to 4,000, but venue capacity is still at 50%, and social distancing still applies, and obviously all the safety procedures that goes with that. And what will the rules look like after the 19th of July? And that social distancing essentially falls away. But I think all of this comes back to what individual company policy looks like, what the appetite looks like within your organisations, what feels right, what feels safe, what feels comfortable. I think that, it feels like, certainly for a lot of the conversations that we've been happening over a period of time, that certain people are we're not going to go back to where we were before. There are things now that are in situ for the foreseeable future, and will continue to be so. With regards to testing and vaccine apps, they're not considered to be obligatory as far as we're aware. However, again, we imagine that every single organisation that we work with would absolutely want to have those in place to ensure the comfortability of the delegates that are attending. So I think those are all very important things to understand, and I think there's been quite a lot of ambiguity around that. So Virginie, I hope that answers some of your questions today.
Just here in our one crazy country, how many people, wave if you're at home, put your hand up at home, but how many people organise international events in the audience? We're not even hitting, this is the very, very tip of an iceberg here in terms of what the rules and regulations are for, not just on travel, but what are going to be the regulations in the countries that we may be hosting our events. It's a vast world.
Then, that sort of leads into how you actually communicate a lot of these issues to your delegates and to your staff as well, because there's anxiety issues that are very prevalent now with people needing to return to a live environment and what that looks like. So what communications tools do we need to be aware of in order to make people feel more comfortable? So Laura, perhaps I can address that question to you.
Yeah, of course, thank you. So I think it is really important to acknowledge that we've all been on our own journey, as we all know, but sometimes we maybe forget that everybody has been on their own journey for the last 18 months or so. And depression has doubled in adults in the UK, and saying, not even taking into account everything going on around the rest of the world. We need to be really conscious of the fact that everybody is in a different mental state. And the likelihood is for those people, when it's been depression's doubled, it's not as in good a state as it was before. And so as event organisers, we need to be, I think, very aware of the fact that we are going to have delegates that we would like them to attend that maybe don't feel comfortable attending. And we've also got team members that might not feel comfortable. You know, I'm from the events industry. I love live, I love shows, I love in-person events, but there's still a little bit of anxiety about going to an event for me, and I'm in the industry and I love it. And so we've got to remember that in our teams there are going to be people that just don't quite feel comfortable. For whatever reason, they might not feel comfortable being back at an event. And of course we've got to juggle that, because we want events to come back, we want live events to happen, non-dead people, in-person events, to Sam's definition earlier. We want in-person events to happen, we want hybrid events to happen. But we need to be aware of the fact we've got these different groups of people. And so in terms of communications, I think we need to be really clear with our attendees and with our team what we are putting in support for them. So I don't think it's right for us just to pick up where we last did an event and go, right, we're going to redo the same thing. I think we need to be using it as an opportunity to reset how we talk to people and reset how we deliver events. So for me, it's about actually saying to people, this is our approach to COVID safety. I'm sure everybody's planning on doing that. This is what we're doing in terms of sanitisation, in terms of testing. What are you doing in terms of mental safety? How are you going to look after my mental safety? We all know we have to look after physical safety. We've been doing it for a long time in the industry. We need to be communicating with our team and with our attendees what we're doing for their mental safety. And I think some of those basic things are making sure we've got mental health first aiders available, whether or not that's online and or offline as well, making sure we've got people available. If we've got an in-person event, having what we'd refer to as a reset room. So we forget sometimes that being in the event like this might feel very safe for you, but getting to the event might actually be quite anxiety driving for people. I didn't want to get on a tube this morning. I'm a London person. I didn't want to get on the tube, so I walked. So us being conscious about how people get to events, we need to be aware of that in our communication as well. Don't just tell them where the nearest tube station is. Actually, maybe suggest to them it's a really nice walk along the river, for example. So giving people that kind of encouragement that you don't have to do things in a certain way. Showing them that you have, in your proactive communication, that you have that support for their mental safety there as well. And give them the opportunity to put their hand up and say, through your registration system, for example, that, do you know what, I actually really struggle with this kind of situation. I don't feel comfortable with it. Is there any support that you can offer me? Ask people that question. They may not answer, but they may answer, and you've got a little bit more rapport with that person. You can be able to support them. So I think being really clear in your communications that you are there to support people physically and mentally, but backing it up. So as with anything, don't say you're going to be supporting people if you're not going to. But yeah, being proactive in those communications to say, we are here, we understand it can be a challenging time for some of you. Some of you are going to be really excited, as are we, some of you are not. And really basic things like, you know, even showing them a video before they arrive on site on social media or something in the morning, say this is what the setup's going to look like. You know, just those little things that might take away some of that little bit of anxiety some people might have. You could do that, and that doesn't have to be a formal thing. That could just be a member of the crew walking around your venue with a phone and just putting it up on social or in the event group, just so they feel like you're being aware that they might not feel comfortable at some points.
There are some studios doing that during lockdown where actually, and because we all know that we can put together the best communication in the world, but we need our delegates, our participants to read that. And nobody ever does, as we all know, because they come and go, where am I meant to be going in the venue? Where's, what, you know, we all know, and let's be honest, when we all go to an event industry event, we do the same thing. It's like, oh, we turn into those people. But in studios during lockdown, 2 or 3 times that I went in, they had the video. Because I think, you know, we'll sit and watch a video of a gerbil drinking a pint of lager. So I think people are getting more comfortable with video and actually having that. I had to tick a box on to say, you know, I'd watched the video. And I definitely would agree. It was so much more reassuring knowing I've visualised, I haven't read it, I've seen, right, when you get here, that's the sort of thing. You need to go through this door. This is the way you walk to the restroom. And actually that really calmed that anxiety down.
I think for me, the first thing, kind of regardless of the communication out to delegates and team, is you have to put it in your risk assessment. Put mental safety and well-being of crew and of attendees in your risk assessment, and then you have to think about it, and then you have to mitigate those risks. So before we even get into, let's just talk to the team and tell them that we think it's okay, put it as part of your planning process, and it's in the communications then from the very beginning of your planning, and then you will communicate it. because it's there and you're going to mitigate those risks. If you don't put it in that very beginning part, those internal comms that you're doing for actually organising the event, it will never make it to the external or internal comms for, depending on the style of event you're doing. But yeah, having it in right from the beginning, I think is really important.
You add your speakers into that as well, because speakers never register for an event, because we know that, so we registered them, so they never see anything. And again, for a speaker coming into an environment first time, I think this is quite, I mean, we were having a joke saying it's what this will be like when she goes to prison. And so, you know, we can have a laugh, but actually the fact that everybody in the room, and it's great today that you've, the team here at Pure have given masks so we can see, visors so we can see people's faces. But we had a keynote on stage and they just completely and utterly struggled. They didn't have the connection with the online chat, so they couldn't see there was engagement. They couldn't see, I know that there's the nodding, but again, the keynote was trying to tell jokes and she couldn't hear people, she couldn't see any reactions. People were much, because it was in the US, they were much more spread out. And the whole keynote lost its whole reason why you have a keynote, because of these elements. And again, it was a big learning. It's like, you know, walk your presenters, you know, is there a green room? Am I sharing it? What does that look like? Is there a screen? Do I have to wear a mask? Is there somewhere I can reapply my lippy because I've masked? Do we have visors? How does that work? What will the audience, how, even in a socially distanced room, so we, you know, we've got people socially distanced, it's a different environment for someone, and you're asking and paying probably a substantial amount of your budget for these people to do something great for your participants. But if they can't connect here and they can't connect there, then you're in trouble. So again, that's got to go back into your pack.
Just talking further about the COVID safety piece, I mean, looking from the venue perspective, obviously, as far as from what I've seen, Laura, you know, certainly your health and safety documentation is pretty extensive. What advice would you give, potentially even to other, other venues, but also when you're actually building that level of documentation to send out internally or externally to clients or to your internal stakeholders? What really does that need to encompass, and what procedures are you going through as a venue?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I love what you mentioned in terms of sort of thinking about the mental safety as well, because that's something that we have always said all along, is we need to assume that everyone is anxious, we need to assume that everyone is nervous, it's their first time doing this, because it probably is for so many people here today, I know I've spoken to, it is. And so you can't over-communicate enough. It's just communication, communication. And in that document, we've got a pre-event guide that we send out before events, and we actually sometimes attach it with our proposals that we send to sort of reassure people right from the start that we've got this covered, we know what we're doing. You know, from the moment that you sort of arrive with us, this is the process. This, you know, you're going to have your temperature checked. This is the one-way system. All of these bits and pieces, you know, you should expect to go and sit down at your table, and we'll bring everything to you. So people are really reassured. And like you said, you know, people don't read that. We send this to the organisers, and we ask the organisers to send this out. And this is one thing that we'd always say, you know, please do, because it's so important that people have that information to, you know, digest before they come on site, because everyone's got their own agendas, everyone's got their own worries. So it's really important that that's sent out to them. But we know that a lot of people won't read it, may have not received it. So it's about us as well, you know, making sure that when people come to the venue that they are reassured, they're reminded of these procedures, they're shown, you know, they're actually taken places rather than just directed. You know, it's really, really key. And we've got COVID safety officers in place so that we can make sure that the right things are being adhered to, because we can't just assume that because one person isn't, you know, abiding by the rules, everyone else is going to feel okay with that. We need to make sure that everyone is doing what they need to be doing. You know, we're not the police, but we've got a responsibility as a venue. We've also got a COVID safe room, so that's part of the pre-event guide as well, which means that, you know, if you don't feel well or if you just feel a little anxious or whatever, you can go into that room and just, you know, calm yourself and gather your thoughts and whatever you need to do. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the processes we've got in place, as you would have experienced today, there's a one-way system in the venue for those that are here. We've also got perspex screens from our service stations. We've gained an accreditation, which means that you know, we've following all of the government guidelines safely. We've got temperature checks. We've got signage outside the meeting rooms to sort of confirm capacities, which is part of that as well. All of our staff have been COVID safety trained, and we always have a briefing beforehand as well, because it's not just about the people coming and visiting, it's also about our staff and how safe they feel. You know, we've got a responsibility, this is our role, and that's what we do, and we love doing it, but things have changed for them as well, and for us. So it's important that we have that briefing beforehand and make sure that everyone knows what they need to be doing. It's just, yeah, over-communicate is all I can say. That's the biggest piece of advice. Yeah.
Do you think that the accountability for this lies with the venue and with the supply base, or do you feel that it should be driven from client side? Because I wonder whether there's a bit of ambiguity around that, actually, as to whether it's driven in-house by the client, or whether it's actually something that the supply base should be very, very forward in driving.
I think it's really a mix. I think, you know, there's only so much we can do and communicate and get out there and try and reinforce. We really need, and this is again part of our pre-event guide, is that we ask that our event organisers have a COVID safety officer from their side, because sometimes people don't want to listen to the venue, people don't want to listen to the suppliers, and they would rather listen to someone who they know, a familiar face, and just having that person from client side sort of reconfirming what we're trying to sort of get across as well. But I do think it's a mixed responsibility. It shouldn't fall just on the venue or suppliers. I don't think that's fair. You know, everyone's got their sort of responsibility within this, and everyone's got to play their part.
We've all got a duty of care.
Yeah.
We all have a legal duty of care, and I think that we all need to input into that. And I think in terms of, you know, end client, there needs to be that request to, and it needs to be part of the brief. But it also needs to have that in the budget sometimes. You know, there might be certain things that an organiser or a venue might want to put in the budget, and therefore we need the support the whole way up and down the chain. That, yes, okay, I understand why that's in there. You shouldn't have to swallow those costs. Actually, yet we want this to be a safe event as well. But I think you're completely right, Laura. We all need to band together in this and say, you know, every part of the chain needs to be thinking about our safety, and obviously in terms of my focus, mental safety as well as the physical safety. But I think we all have to do that.
Absolutely, because we can't keep you safe unless everyone is doing what they need to be doing to keep you safe. Yeah, so it's a team effort.
Adrian, from a broadcasting perspective and from a production perspective, are there various hoops that you've had to jump through that you hadn't had to jump through before?
Yes, making a lot of signs. There's signs everywhere now, so that's the next business I'm going into, sign making. Really, it's client first, because it's how does the client feel? And even though there are guidelines and you went through them expertly before, it's how the client feels and how they're going to drive the project with you. So I think for me, it's three things. So from our point of view, it's actually been harder to get crew now because of the track and trace testing. You know, a lot of clients will insist if you haven't got a negative test, you're not working. So we've either got to cover that, or the client's got to cover that, or something's got to happen. The second thing is distancing, which has been, it's more in shoots, but obviously we've covered the venues before, but in shoots we were originally set to film in a host's shed, because he's got a great shed with all his, you know, sort of like tools and his experiments everywhere. It was too tight to film in, so we had to hire a sound stage in London and recreate the shed at double the width, so that we could get everyone in distanced and the client could attend and all that kind of thing. So I think that leads to the third thing, which is budget, which you touched on as well. You've got additional HSSE requirements, you've got the COVID safety personnel, you've got all the testing as well. The client has got to be up for it and understand that this is essential, and add it to budgets as well, because I think, you know, it's not a crew thing, it's not an agency thing to swallow those costs. It's got to come from client level, and then they've got to say, we're serious about doing this event, and this is how we're going to show that.
So I think that leads on quite nicely to actually address that topic of budget, which is often the elephant in the room, where the perception is very much that it's likely to be doubly as expensive, producing a hybrid event to producing either a live event or something virtually. So I wonder whether, you know, from our perception as an agency, you know, if you have a live event budget, obviously now you have significant restrictions on how many individuals you're able to have in a room, because you've got a minimum, you've got a capacity, chances are you're going to get less people that are going to attend live, and so therefore your F&B requirements are likely to be lower, and so there's likely to be a sort of a juggling of money, so to speak. So it's unlikely to be more expensive, but in my mind, it's just a reallocation of budget. Sam, would you agree with that?
Oh, thank you. Hospital pass there. I think there's a school of thought that I don't think, and I'm sure this audience accepted, I think that we would have got to this situation full stop, where we needed to look at how we were producing events, full 100% in person. We haven't been inclusive. You alluded to that, Laura, in terms of, you know, introverts, extroverts. We have to think about, which I think is much, much bigger and much more of a problem for us than pandemic, is sustainability. I think organisations are going to be looking at this and seeing in the past 14 months we've changed. And if bringing people together at a big expense in a destination hasn't happened, but your bottom line has still remained stable or possibly gone up, you're going to be asking a question, why am I going to fly? But I don't want to be the headline saying it's Barclays fly 100 people to Bahamas, you know, when we're facing the biggest climate crisis of any generation. So I think in terms of the cost element, I think we have to realise that, you know, we had to consider some of these things as well, and the darn quality of what we were producing. You know, having just one camera for a stream is just not a good experience for anybody. So these things would have happened. So I think we have to communicate that when we're looking at a budget. I don't necessarily think that everything has to be more expensive. I think there are real opportunities to balance this in terms of travel. You don't need to necessarily, I was speaking to a keynote speaker, and she has a client that flies her from Germany to Australia for a 45-minute session. Well, let's work out what, I mean, we're all looking now thinking that's nuts, but that's what's happened in our world, and that's what we signed off on budgets for. We've got back to this wonderful world that we're calling choice. We don't have to put, you know, she's only going to fly business class. We're going to have to put her up for a minimum of how many days because she needs to get over a jet lag before she performs. So, you know, I think it's movement and it's being creative about it, but I think it's also being very realistic that, you know, technology costs. You know, you guys producing phenomenal events. So again, I think we've been having the budget conversation for years and years in EVCOM and MPI and you know, all the industry discussions we've had, because we've got to produce the right budget. And, you know, my question would be, were we producing those right budgets before?
And I think there's a very sensible question to be asked around, you know, we've been producing big production sets for a lot of big performances and big shows, and is there likely now to be a readjustment there because it's more effective with potentially less equipment to deliver to two different audiences now, of which one audience almost certainly won't be willing to travel for the foreseeable future. And so are we going to go back to building those big sets in big venues? Because we may still need the size of the venue because we've got less capacity, or there's going to be more of a want to have less people in a space. But there'll be a readjustment, presumably, of having more cameras and less, you know, LED curved screens and stages and all of that equipment. Adrian, what's your take on that?
Well, I think readjustment is the word, yes. I think when it all went virtual, clients wanted to, you know, pay less because there's not a big event to put on. But I think as now we're coming back into hybrid, you are essentially putting on two events, or at least you're addressing two audiences. So the client can see value for money, and you need to give the client different value for money, as we've talked about before. So I think it's very much that. And I think, you know, when it comes to doing events, at the end of all this, we've got to realise why we do events and why people turn up. It's a bit like you wouldn't turn up to a concert and the artist isn't there. You know, we want to have access to that CEO or that announcement, or touch and feel the new technology at CES. You know, so there's got to be a balance. Where it's appropriate to travel, people should travel. Where it adds, you know, mental well-being to have that peak in the year where you're going to the conference, then it has value. So I think there is a readjustment not only of budgets but also of how we do events overall. That one I'm going to do virtually, that one I'm going to attend, definitely going to attend, always have a great time.
The wonders of technology is that, you know, maybe gone are the days of, you know, massive great big builds where you're just going to be chucking that into a bin at the end of a 3-day show. at big expense. And this is why I think this evolution, because technology, there's existing technology. This has been your world, Adrian, for longer than all of us. There is this opportunity to use technology in venues, in destinations, that's phenomenal, that will only get cheaper to use. The more we are, bringing this world of economics in, supply and demand, we shift. And the second thing to that is look at your audiences. It's not about people not, traveling because of COVID. Look at the opportunity of where those audiences can grow. I have seen so many of my clients in the last, well, I keep on saying 12 months, but it's been longer than that now, hasn't it, sadly? So many of my clients have been really surprised at their numbers. They've actually had, more of my clients have had a numbers increase this past 14 months than a numbers decrease. I see it in the chat when I'm hosting these events where people say, we love it, this has been an incredible experience, please keep the virtual because I can't attend. And I think we need to look at that as that opportunity for stakeholders, for sponsors, for revenue generating, not just about cutting back in budgets. It's actually, well, what's that opportunity to increase the spend, to be able to increase the budget?
One of the challenges, I think, has been certainly from the conversations that we've been having with a lot of our clients, is that it's the educational piece around, educating the stakeholders around the value, I think, of delivering hybrid. And, how do you present that as a business case of actually delivering a hybrid or a virtual event, and what really needs to happen? So, we've certainly been operating more in a consultancy basis with a lot of companies because it's been very difficult for stakeholders to really understand what that looks like, because the face-to-face live event experience, you can really see it in black and white, but with everybody's expectation, it seems to have been that virtual is going to be so much cheaper, but people still don't understand you've got the back-end production. And I believe that we might have a question from the broadcast audience around this.
We do, yes. So we've got a question from Christopher McCarthy. He says, how do you suggest working with stakeholders to take them on the journey from live to hybrid, including the differences between presenting live and virtual?
Well, that's a great question, Christopher. Thank you very much for submitting that. And I wonder whether Sam would like to answer that question.
Is it me, or am I just getting the difficult ones?
Sorry.
Should have made this a wine event, and then I'd be quite happy. So first of all, hi, Chris. It's lovely to know that you're there with us. I think it's a really, really difficult journey, and I certainly know in certain industries it's much, much harder from experience with my clients who are people like you. I think we're going to harp on, and it sounds very cheesy about the word communication. I think you've got to be talking as meeting designers, not as event managers. And I think that's a really important thing that we've got to suddenly, back to what you were saying, Charlotte, about consultancy. We have to now become the business consultant. We aren't furniture movers as individuals. That's what we do to produce an event. What we do is we look, and we've got to talk about stakeholder value. We've got to be able to understand that stakeholder and put them through the journey that they need to go through. And I think that's something that ordinarily, because we don't have enough time, we've now got to make that time to start with our stakeholders very, very early in the process. If you've done, if anybody, I don't know if anyone's done the CED, the Certificate in Event Design, if you haven't, I would suggest you go and have a look at it, because it takes you through from empathy mapping. So you map out all your stakeholders. What do they see? What do they hear? What do they think? What do they feel? And you start putting them through the journey of what's their entering behaviour, what the event is, and what we want their exiting behaviour to be. So I think all I can say to Chris and to everybody is start this stakeholder communications early and go through that journey of empathy mapping and stakeholder design, and hopefully that will help. And I promise you, go through it once, it's insanely painful, and then they'll all come out and go, well, that was really good. Oh, that was really good. Oh, everyone was really engaged. Oh, that. And then when are we doing it again? So, hold hands, accept that this is all new for everybody, and gin probably is a good one.
I know we're running very, very short on time, but I believe we might have one more question from the broadcast audience.
So we've got one from Angela Fletcher, who says, if there were slides or content on screen, what would we see virtually? Screen, speakers, both in separate boxes. What would the format be, essentially?
Adrian, I'm going to throw that into your arena.
Whatever you want to see, you can see, because, I mean, you're right with the conversations you're having about technology has come on. So we used to turn up at events like this with a massive truck, park it outside, run loads of cables inside. That doesn't have to happen now because everything, you know, has changed. We created a control room in the cloud where there's people at home that can mix the sound, there's people at home that can mix the vision and bring in sources from everywhere. And I think we've been talking about the audience joining virtually, but it's also the stakeholders or the contributors or the panelists that can join. You know, there could be 3 of us here and one on a, you know, in a screen. You know, be creative with your set and your, you know, back to that whole creating a show idea. But I think in terms of that, in terms of getting that back and forth, think about your audience. So what are they going to be experiencing at home? So if there's something on the screen that we need to see, let the audience at home see the stuff that's on the screen. Full frame. Put it up full frame. If you need to see the contributor, let's have the contributor. So much like you watch the football or you watch, you know, conference coverage on TV, let's see the most relevant shot, because everyone in the room has the option to look at whatever they want. But at home, you've just got to think like a director, think like the television program, make it beginning, middle, and end with a bit of gloss, and therefore you'll give the audience like a different experience, but the best experience for their platform.
Great advice, Adrian. Thank you very much indeed. And I can't believe it, but we've very sadly run out of time. And I know that there are questions that we had in the in-person audience. I hope that we have addressed a lot of them anyhow. And there were also some other questions that came in from the broadcast audience as well. I would be delighted to answer those if they haven't already been answered today. So please do get hold of me and I'll be delighted to have a chat with you about those. Thank you so much to everybody who's taken the time to be here today, to experience this in person. It's been so lovely to see you all. And thank you enormously for all of those of you that joined us online today as well. It's been wonderful knowing that you've all been there in the broadcast audience today. We really, really look forward to seeing you soon. There will be a link that goes out with the replay of today's event, so you'll be able to pass that on to any of your team members. And we will also be sending out a link to download a white paper with all the content from today's session as well. So look out for those. And again, thank you all very, very much for being here and look forward to seeing you soon.